Hello everyone, welcome to Winthrop and the World. I'm Paul Baskin, and with us today is Suzanne Swope. Suzanne is a member of the Town Council here in Winthrop.
That's right.
Precinct 4. You live in Seal Harbor, right?
Right.
Which is the big, as people, anybody knows Winthrop knows, it's the big condo complex on the
Right.
water. And you're also a career academic as well. You've been a professor, an administrator?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Both sides.
How have you enjoyed that?
Loved it.
Really?
It was great.
How did you get into being an academic, first of all? Maybe just tell us a little bit about that.
Well, it's kind of interesting. My father, when I was in 5th grade, had a laryngectomy, and it really, changed our lives. And I just thought I could really help people that had problems like that.
Oh, so that's your academic.
And
your
that was
academic
my
focus
my academic focus was in speech and hearing therapy.
Right. Well, that's wonderful.
And then I went to the dark side of administration.
Yeah, well, that's more of an inside joke for people who've been in higher ed, but administration is a perfectly respectable career with higher
No,
ed.
I
It
know.
keeps the things going.
I know, unless you were a faculty member.
Yeah, unless you're a faculty member, perhaps, yes.
Yeah.
But anyway, here in Winthrop, member of the Town Council, big issue is, of course, 3A, and again, for people who
Right.
to remind them, 3A is also known as the MBTA Communities Act. The basic idea is to encourage growth of housing, which is seemed to be widely needed in the state and in the Boston area, and to do it near transit. So the idea is the cities and towns around Boston are asked to rezone in ways that add more housing if they're near transit. And in the case of Winthrop, it's been a pretty controversial thing. Winthrop is one of the towns that have pushed back probably harder than most in town. And I take you're part of the sentiment that the law isn't appropriate. I'm wondering if you maybe would just say a word or two about why you feel that way.
Yeah, sure. When I started out, when this all came to us as a town council, I think we all thought, Winthrop is so dense, and already there's so many homes here that certainly they wouldn't ask us to build 880 units. That would be so difficult.
And you're referring to the estimate that the state put in its original plan.
Yeah.
It wasn't a requirement number, it was just the estimate of what the state thought it would mean?
No, it was what we were supposed to do.
Supposed to do, okay.
And so originally we all thought we could discuss this with Lydia Edwards,
Our state
and,
senator.
and make it work for us. Well, it turned out that no, we were going to be asked to comply like everyone else, and they would review whatever our planning board put on the table to meet these requirements. And that doesn't mean necessarily 882 units at the time, because there could be offsets perhaps that would make up for that, and that we wouldn't have to build new 882 units. However, as we got more into this, and the planning board offered a possibility, this would include Seal Harbor, this would include Providence Park, this would include Fort Heath, Seal Harbor 1 and 2, 1 and 3, by the way.
So the places you're mentioning are large multifamily complexes.
That's correct.
And Seal Harbor being the very tall one.
Right, and,
yes.
and actually at the time, I had even thought that would be a possibility. That would mean we wouldn't have to build anything, and they would just let us, a pass for us. But it didn't turn out exactly that way, because of the way in which the law is written. It will require us to do things that I don't think in the end will be very good for Winthrop.
Such as?
Such as. The first thing is that there is no restriction on the number of bedrooms, no restriction on the size, and no restriction on the number of occupancy, a number of occupants that can live in those units. That creates the possibility of when you build, you could build a tenement type home, because we have a restriction in our town that you can't overcrowd like that. You can't put 5 unrelated people in one bedroom. We have zoning restrictions that apply to Winthrop that are much more stringent than the state law.
Right, but is that those required to be carried over? Because the idea or the plan that the planning board came up with would simply be to rezone Seal Harbor and some of these other complexes you talked about to reflect the density, the zoning density or the housing density that already exists there. Is that part of the plan acceptable?
Let's talk about, and by the way, I think not everybody interprets this the same way.
Okay.
That could be, and that could be. But the truth of the matter is, rezoning means that we would rezone.
Okay.
We would rezone to the requirements
Right.
of 3A. That changes our zoning law.
Yeah.
So, and this would only apply to new units. So
Okay.
the question is, once you start testing that, you never know where you'll go with that. And who knows, this law has changed 4 times. So I don't know that this will be maintained on those particular units. I'm worried about all of Winthrop. In fact, I don't think the law, as the way it's written, is good for anyone. There's too much punishment about that. In other words, if you don't do that, you will then lose grants.
Right.
It started off with 4 grants. But then as the governor talks about it, indeed there are any discretion, any grants that are discretional from the governor
Right.
may be not available to us.
I do want to talk about the punishment or the consequences, if you will. But first, before we leave the issue
Okay.
of zoning,
Okay.
are you fundamentally, if the zoning, if it was rezoned in a way that simply reflected the density that exists in Seal Harbor and these other complexes, didn't do some of these other things you're talking about in terms of somehow changing how many people can live in a unit, but if it just did that part, would that be
No.
okay?
No.
And why not?
And let me tell you about 3A, in terms of our CBD. We have
So
a central
CBD is the
business district.
central business,
I
yes.
was going to say,
Yep.
central business district that we care very much about. We're hoping to attract more business in that area. One of the rules of the law is that you can't put businesses on anything but the first floor. So that means we couldn't attract a business that might want to take a whole building.
Okay.
We're restricted only to the first floor
You restrict that restriction is by the town or by the state?
by the state.
By the state under the 3A, you're saying?
Yes. I'm talking now all about under 3A.
Okay.
The other thing is that it prohibits required parking for non-residential uses. So you can't put in that business district parking for businesses, which would then restrict our businesses.
So as the degree to which that affects implementation, I understand. So primarily, the way Winthrop would meet the state requirement under its proposed plan would be largely having to do with these complexes, and then a little bit of it involves a central business, a relatively small amount.
I don't know, because I don't know when a person sells their unit in Seal Harbor, whether that's considered a new unit or not. Could they revise what is within their particular unit
So that's okay.
and change it?
Sorry, that's what I was asking about the central, because you raised the issue of the central
I did.
business district. So I was just asking you, first of all, the central business district is a relatively small part of the overall formula that gets us to the 880 units. Is that correct?
It is about 200 and some units.
Okay.
But the problem, but that is very vital to the way in which Winthrop can grow.
Well, I understand.
change.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about, so just for context, that's only a fifth
That's
maybe of
right.
the overall compliance. And then you were talking about the issue you were raising was the issue of businesses on the second floor or higher. Do we have a lot of situations like that?
No, we're trying to develop a central business district where we can attract more business.
And we've asked the state whether that element, if that's a big deal to us, whether that's at all movable on that?
That's not the way the law reads right now, it's first floor.
Okay. But I mean, but if it's a big deal, what I'm trying to get at is which of these issues.
Can we negotiate with them?
Which of
and
these
they may
issues are
change?
like real deal breakers, and which ones are sort of and kind of on the side, and we can maybe manage them, kind of thing.
You can't manage I don't believe you can allow your zoning in your town to be controlled by the state, because the state can change those laws at any time.
Right.
And we don't have an opportunity in the planning board, we don't have an opportunity on our zoning and ordinance boards to control that.
Okay.
It's now done by the state.
Okay, so that was now that we get to the other thing you started to raise, which was the issue of measures that the state is proposing or is actually written in the law to compel compliance. I guess one question is, do you fundamentally accept the idea that the state, whether it's 3A or anything else, has the right to say to a town, we give you a lot of state aid, and in return for that state aid, we are going to expect a certain number of things. Now, is that, again, setting aside the 3A question, but just as a general matter of principle, is that seem like an acceptable thing?
The state could probably do a lot to make our lives either better or maybe miserable. I mean, the ferry is a nice example. That's a positive.
And what you're referring to is the fact that it was just announced in the last few days that the ferry from Winthrop into Boston will now go directly, at least on some runs,
to Boston, and it'll be 2 ferries.
Yeah, and which is a much shorter ride than the ride into Quincy.
That's right.
Quincy, yes.
So those are good things. So obviously the state does have a tremendous amount of control. We have not been the recipient of a lot of state grants, if that's what you're asking me.
Well, no, the first question I was asking is whether just the principle, because it sounded like you were challenging the principle of the fact that the state, and I'm just trying to understand the state. I mean, all the state is saying to us or any other town is that we have this money, we're going to give it to you. In return for giving it to you, we're asking a certain number of things, and this is the result of. I mean, this is 3A. In the case of 3A, that was a law passed over almost unanimously by both chambers and signed by a Republican governor.
In a very small paragraph at the end of his term, yes. It was a much bigger law than this, and he didn't have he didn't have all of the caveats that Maura Healey has put in there.
Okay, and that the state Supreme Court agreed is reasonable.
The state Supreme Court will see, as you know, that there's all sorts of fights about this going on. There's 22 bills.
So just on the question then of the state having the right to do this kind of thing, you do or do not accept that the state has that right in return for the money it gives out?
I'm not sure what you mean by right. I mean, obviously they can ask for it, but this is not a law that's been passed by the legislature with all of its caveats. So we'll see what happens. I mean, this is what the governor says is what she wants. And by the way, what the case in Milton said, that part of that law was legal. The unfunded part and all of the stipulations she's put in they did not agree to, and that's what's going on now. So they didn't agree.
The unfunded part and the stipulations she agreed to.
I mean all the appendices that she has written into this.
Okay, but my understanding, and maybe tell me if that's not right, is that the state Supreme Court essentially said that the state has a right to do this, and not only can they apply it to the grants that were in the initial law, but that the governor could apply it to other grants if the governor chose to do that. That's what the court said.
I think that's what's going on now. That's why these appeals, and that's why the governor has rewritten or asked us, gone back into this law, and we'll see what happens. She has a 3-month stay on this.
So again, principles. The underlying principle of the law is the idea that Massachusetts, one, has a housing, and certainly in the Boston area, has a severe housing shortage. Matter of fact, we have that around the country, but certainly in the Boston area, we're seeing people leaving the state because they can't stay there. People can't, at least that's what we're seeing. But I want to ask if that's what you're seeing too. And then the second fundamental element of 3A was the idea of adding that housing nearest to transit, therefore reducing car usage and car congestion and all the problems that come with that. So I guess I just want to ask you, do those two reasons, whether you agree with the law and the way it was written, but do you agree with the problems, the two main problems the law was sort of getting at?
The first is I don't really have good data on the housing crisis that we have. Okay. And the reason I say that is that I see a lot of vacancies around. What I don't see is enough affordable housing. And this law does not even allow that. So this is not affordable housing. This is very different.
Well, there are people who will say that affordable housing, one of the chief ways of creating affordable housing is just to build more housing. If there's more housing, then prices will go down as a matter of simple economics. Do you accept that sort of general rationale?
Well, let's see. If that were true, then I guess in Winthrop, because we have more houses. We have maybe 3,000 more houses in 60 years than we'd had before with the same population. The prices have gone up. So indeed, when you are on the coasts, it appears as if the prices have gone up. Certainly the number of units in Revere and other places, there are lots of units that are vacant, but they're very expensive. So the prices haven't gone down. The prices perhaps will go down if nobody actually lives in them, and perhaps that will force the rental prices to plummet. I don't know.
Okay. And as far as the idea of trying to encourage housing near transit, does that as a fundamental concept make sense?
Yeah, I think there were a lot of us that thought, without all these, taking away all these grants and using punishment, we are building. We are not building. Winthrop is building.
Mm-hmm.
And if you just look around, you can see that we have lots of units that are now going up and being constructed.
Right.
We just wanted to control the amount, and we wanted to control the occupancy, and we wanted to control the bedrooms. We don't want the state to force us into building things that are not what we want in Winthrop. We're certainly building multifamily homes.
But again, does 3A force Winthrop to build any housing? Because I'm understanding it was a rezoning, and the case, most of the rezoning is in places where there's already multifamily anyway.
Well, why would you, wait, I think you just said the reason that the governor has passed this is that she wants us to build more.
Right, as a general principle behind the law,
Absolutely.
yes. In the case of Winthrop particularly, which is different, it's the suggestion, I think you made it too, which is Winthrop is already very dense, so that wouldn't necessarily apply here as much as it applies.
How do you know that?
Know what?
How do you know whether in the future, even now, how do you know that the state, or no, not the state, a developer can come in and say, wait a minute, you're under 3A.
Right.
This area is under 3A.
Right.
And we want to make sure that we can build something that we're going to make money on.
Mm-hmm.
So the more people, the more bedrooms,
Mm-hmm.
the more occupancy,
Mm-hmm.
the greater that's going to be.
Right. No, that's
opportunity.
I hear what you're saying. So you're suggesting maybe in the case of Seal Harbor, which is already a 10, 12-story tower,
Jen?
that someone would come in and tear that down and build an even bigger.
Oh no, I don't
bigger
think
thing?
so, because you know what? I don't think it would be worth it. I'm not talking about them coming in and rebuilding the whole building,
Okay.
but I'm talking about buying units
Okay. Buying units and
within the building.
And how does that? What different? Why would that concern you? So if the units already exist, someone else buys them. What difference does that make in terms of overall housing to the town?
And doubling the bedrooms, and doubling the occupancy.
And doubling the bedrooms. Okay. I mean, what does Seal Harbor look like? I mean, maybe getting too deep in the weeds, but Seal Harbor is already a fairly dense place. I mean, how much denser can you get it, you think?
Depends.
It depends.
I mean, it depends on who buys it and who wants how they build it.
Okay.
How they change it.
As far as the town budget, so one of the reasons that people seem so concerned about, including the town manager and other members of the town council, is that yes, maybe that in a perfect world you'd like to be able to perfectly declare every bit of self-control in terms of zoning and many other things that goes on in this town, but that there's state money and that's important too, and that you give something, you get something, and that the overall benefit of the state funding in this town is huge, and that we can't really take that risk for what may be sort of what some people, maybe even you, are setting out as sort of theoretical problems that might occur in the future. But this is real money that we really actually need now.
How much money do you think we'll get? See, that has been, we have applied for a lot of grants. We have gotten some money, but we haven't gotten a lot of money.
Well, one thing, roads, my understanding, maybe you know otherwise, is that most of the road construction in this town involves state money, right?
It is.
Okay, and there's lots of other, there's potentially millions of dollars that the town gets from the state every year, isn't there?
No, we don't get millions of dollars every year.
Don't.
Not millions of dollars every year. But we have gotten some state grants, there's no question about it. However, if we start adding people, a lot of people, then we're going to build a new school.
Yeah.
And then we're going to we also have already density in our roads. So you're right, we are trying to improve some of our infrastructure.
So even 3A hasn't yet been implemented, and even with it implemented, the schools are already in a tight bind, and we're already adding housing completely separate from 3A, right?
Some, yeah. I mean, but we're not adding a lot, and we don't have to worry about the future about that because we control it. So we have to look at our housing and be careful about what we're building and how much, where we're building it, and what the infrastructure is like in the areas that we're building. And we can control that.
Should we do things to avoid families coming into the town, in the sense that the cost? I just want to finish, because it's been said by others, and that, you know, obviously if you have families, children are one of the most expensive. I mean, it's half the town's budget, right? Is the schools, and we'll get to that on the school override.
60%.
Yeah. So I mean, not to be cruel, but just as a matter of sort of reality in terms of what it balancing the town's budget, do we need to look at ways of sort of discouraging families with children from coming to town, either by maybe having, you know, like you said, smaller units so that maybe there wouldn't be families in them? Is that sort of a thought that the town has?
I don't know. I don't know.
You don't know?
I think what I think about in the long term is that we have an aging population.
Okay.
And you can tell that by the number of students that we have in the schools versus the number of people we have in the town.
Which is what, relatively low students per?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And so we had higher graduating classes 60 years ago than we do now.
Okay.
So we almost, I don't know, graduating class 150 or something like that. So it's less students. The question is, I think what you ask, is should we discourage families from coming? We just need to think about that planning, because as people age, they probably will go to many of the units that are being built now. But that leaves their homes open if they want to stay in Winthrop. Right. So I think we will have more families, but more in when we can plan for that. We just can't give up all the control that we have about our planning. That's my feeling about it.
Okay. Again, with us is Suzanne Swope. She's a member of the Town Council here in Winthrop. Just in terms of the overall town's budget and financial situation, now, as you were talking about, we have a vote coming up on two issues. One is a funding override to get more money for the schools. The other is to build a fire station. Right. And you also just mentioned, of course, that that right now we have relatively few students per population. So if we sort of normalize that number over time, it would sound like the situation would get even tougher in terms of affordability. I guess what I'm getting at is the town's overall financial situation manageable, strong and manageable and sustainable?
We're doing the best we can. I think we're doing pretty well. I mean, our budget is about $72 million.
Okay.
And 60% of that goes to the schools, and 40% goes to the town. We have, in that budget, I think, can't remember. It's well. So let me stop with that. So So are we going to be okay? Yeah. Can we manage this? We are asking for an override for the schools and a debt exclusion for the firehouse.
Okay.
Without that, we can't maintain the quality in our schools, and we certainly do need to repair and change and build a new firehouse. Okay. So we wouldn't be doing that well if we don't get either one of those. That's going to put a crimp in our budget. We're going to have to work on that.
Right, but even if we do get them, that's still the money that needs to be spent. And there's also other big expenses coming to the town in terms of being a low-lying coastal community and the climate and all that. We're looking at the numbers, you know, even in the short term are look fairly large in the tens of millions, and it seems like it's going to get no better later on. So I'm just sort of asking you, do you have a comfort level that we have it worked out in this town, that somehow the numbers are going to make sense? I
never have a comfort level about money in terms of the town, because climate change is real and it's here. And given the current political landscape, when climate change is not real, according to some, that's going to be a problem. Right. If we have no federal money at all to support the work that we need to do, so that we are not run over by storms and not degraded in terms of our seawall, et cetera.
Well, doesn't that make the potential loss of state money even more of a fear?
Oh, I'm sure, because if the state doesn't have any money either, if the feds don't, I mean, a lot of money, it passes from feds to the state. So I guess all the blue states will have to think about that. Well,
again, getting back to 3, I mean, 3 was a democratically passed law, and I'm just trying to ask you whether it's really worth. I mean, I understand full well that there are people who have real concerns about what some of
Right.
it says, but is it really fair to look at it and say that those concerns are so great that they outweigh the potential financial trouble that could be bringing to the town?
I think it puts us at risk in terms of safety. I think it puts us at risk in terms of overcrowding. I don't think that, this is an interpretation, that you can depend upon the state to, if we didn't build any more housing, for the state to say, we can change this zone. So I don't want to give control to the state to do it. I think we can handle it better here, and I think we can handle our finances better. I don't think, and I do hope, as the state auditor have said, this is an unfunded mandate, and I'm hoping that it will, and it's a political issue.
Right.
There are lots of bills in the House that are trying to reel this in and change it, and I'm going to hope for the best.
Okay. Just in the last few minutes, I want to ask you, as I have for some others, the situation with the tone of discussion in this town. I mean, obviously on the town council, you're seeing it, that there's emotions. Sometimes that involves people shouting out during meetings, interrupting during meetings. I mean, what do you see going on? Is this the same kind of thing we're seeing on the national level, where people just don't want to hear each other? What do you see happening, and what to do about it?
Well, I think the town council president has his hands full, and I think he is being very prudent about how to manage this. And so I think he will set the tone, and I'm hoping that some of the things that have happened won't happen again.
I hear that, and thank you, but maybe I'm just looking for your sense of what you see in the town. Is this a town of people who are at each other's throats, or is what we're seeing in the town council sort of a microcosm that doesn't reflect what really this town is about? Or that's what I'm maybe trying to get at with that question.
I don't know. I think sometimes people are passionate on both sides of the issue of 3A. There's no question.
Right.
And I think we've had some pretty good discussions, and I think people have brought up some really good points on both sides.
Okay.
So when we find ourselves in a situation where we're threatened,
Okay.
where people are concerned about their homes, there's no question that there's going to be some perhaps heated discussion.
Right.
But that's not every meeting.
Right.
And I don't think, and I think, as I said in our last meeting, I don't know if you saw it, but we need people to come to our meetings.
Right.
And sometimes maybe the way in which they say something is concerning,
Right.
but that's democracy.
Right.
And I want them to come, and I want them to feel safe.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that they will. I know that there's a couple that have not, and that's not good. So
Yeah.
we need to work on it.
But the town overall, if you don't feel, I mean, I just even before today, I saw there was an exchange in one of the Facebook listings or whatever about dogs on the beach, and some of the tone of the discussion was, I mean, it was whether they should be leashed or not, and who's leashing them, and all that kind of stuff. But the tone got very caustic. I mean, we know that's what happens on social media. That's sort of the lay of the land there. But I guess I'm trying to figure out, is that really reflecting what's sort of the underlying tenor of the town? We can't even talk about dogs on the beach without yelling at each other, kind of thing.
I hope that we can talk about dogs on the beach without yelling, but I didn't see that on social media. I often don't usually look at Facebook, frankly.
Maybe a healthy practice. Anyway, so thank you. Again, with us today was Suzanne Swope, a member of the Town Council here in Winthrop. Thank you very much for the time.
Thank you. Appreciate it.